Okay, there we go. Now we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Um, so yeah, I know the debate that you spoke of, and I watched a little bit of it, but I didn't fully watch it.
Okay. Yeah, there was a part where they kept talking about how like black people probably should leave the United States. It's probably good for them. And then they started saying, "Hey, black nationalists agree with us that they should actually leave the United States." And I didn't know that that was part of the black nationalist platform. Are you guys trying to leave the United States?
Yeah, for the some of us, I'm not personally separationist, but I am a segregationist. I do believe that we do need to be divided. I don't think that it's feasible for us to make a big old grand return back to Africa. It's been tried before. It hasn't
Mm-hmm.
worked, and I do think that there are some benefits to us staying in the United States. I'm a reservationist, so I generally believe that we should just use group economics to build towns, like small towns throughout the United States, and then applied for a reservation status for the United States.
Because that works out so well for the Native Americans.
Um, yeah. So the Native Americans would be a bit different. The Native Americans just pretty much got left out in the cold by the U.S. government. We're definitely it's more of a gradual process for us rather than just throwing us on a piece of land and leaving us die.
Okay. So
What's the big what's the big incentive, I guess, as far as the pro segregation movement? I'm interested in why that's a big plus in this ideal.
So for me, my reason for segregation is so obviously I believe in systematic racism, institutional racism, and I used to be a liberal, and I used to think we can solve these issues, we can break through them, we can work through these institutions, implement policies, or even affirmative action to justify and kind of correct institutional racism. Um, I now believe that that's not possible. I believe that for institutional racism to be completely broken, you need to break this as a whole. If you like interconnected vertices on a on a graph, then taking out one point or eliminating one point doesn't destroy the system. It just rearranges itself. And so I truly believe that either you need to break the entire system apart and build a new, or you need to remove yourself from the system. And I'm not a fan of violent revolution.
So are you a Marxist then?
I'm a socialist. I don't believe in everything that Marx teach, but I am a
Okay.
socialist.
The reason I ask is because I know the heads of the BLM organizations say a lot of the same things. Like they think that we need to kind of break the entire system and start over, and that the only way to do that would be through Marxism. So
Um, I disagree. I'm not, obviously I agree with the sentiment of Black Lives Matter. I know this is a cheddar point, but I agree with Black Lives Matter, but I agree with the organization. And it's for different reasons than them. Um, but I find that their movement has kind of been co-opted by people who don't actually have the best interests in mind for Black people. And so, yeah.
I mean, I would agree with you. I don't like the organization, but I like the movement. Like I definitely consider myself part of Black Lives Matter, the movement. I would say that they've been co-opted for sure. At least the narrative has been co-opted, but that's mostly by like right-wing media putting out nothing but hey, they're rioting and they're doing this and they're doing that, and it's like, okay, that's that's why are we like diverting from the message constantly? Like there's more important things going on here. But I'm definitely in support of the movement. You don't like the movement and you do like the organization, is that what you said?
No, quite the opposite. I do like the movement, but I just don't like the organization. And the reason I don't personally like the organization is kind of for what you described. Like, they're more Marxist, or not even Marxist. I think that they're just left-leaning liberal. I truly believe that, a lot of their backers and campaign funders, while I do agree with like the principle harm reduction, I just believe that they're allowed to exist because they don't actually challenge any systems. And so they're just basically a front group for furthering the type of racism that exists under capitalism, essentially.
Okay. So what if you met somebody like Candace Owens? What would your pitch to her be to be a black nationalist? Like what are the pros to being a black nationalist for black Americans?
Okay. So when it comes to like talking like black conservatives, it depends on like, obviously the topic of the conversation. I don't, like to like intrude and like, mess up whatever conversation people are having. But when it comes to like pitching like black nationalism, like conservatives, you gotta try to grow with like, because I used to be a Republican, so I understand a lot of the talking points about, like culture and like, stats like 1350. And I usually try to play to them essentially like I don't usually mention like proletariat, bourgeois. Don't want to mention that. That's gonna upset them. But I usually try to talk about like how many issues that we have in the black community and how like divided we are and how black people are just so or ultimately just like so downtrodden in so many ways. I don't bring up institutional racism, but I do like the crime issue to them and how like maybe community policing could fix some of the crime issues in our communities. And they usually appeal a lot to like the unification idea, of like a party that represents black issues or I try to definitely dissuade them that the Republican Party is not that party. The Republican Party does not actually have your best interest in mind, that we should create a new party or a new political organization that actually does.
So I guess I'm curious about the segregation. Like, what would be like the ultimate goal here? How would that be achieved in a way that doesn't like start a big uproar amongst the entire country?
Um, well, I'll say to one extent that it's already happening. It's happening very slow. It's got like in a very slow, like over maybe a generation or two, just move and separation from society. Like we pretty much already are. We're already locked in ghettos with very little economic opportunities, and so Black America is so radically different from the rest of America that I don't think um, that our recluse, that our movement out of it is going to be as big as an issue as you might find. But we already have, products like Freedom, Georgia, which is a city in Georgia, obviously, started because of the Black Lives Matter movement, that is essentially supposed to be Black controlled and self-autonomous. So, it's going to happen more and more and more over time. More of these places are going to get popped up. The OAU, or the AU, the African Union, for example, already is developing Wakanda One. That's supposed to be like a home place for the entire African diaspora. So it's already happening in some forms, basically.
Okay. Yeah, something we were talking about earlier, that because we were talking about alt-right, and one of the things that definitely helps the alt-right when they kind of like pull normies and things like that is the common language on the left of calling everybody racist and fascist and kind of confusing the normies to where they don't actually have any clue what is racist and what is fascist. I've had numerous conversations with other Black nationalists, and actually I've had a lot of Black Hebrew Israelites on as well.
Oh.
And they all try to avoid the words racist and things like that because they agree that it kind of muddies the waters when it comes to an actual conversation about what is or isn't racist or what is or isn't helpful, especially when it comes to systemic racism, because that's probably the bigger problem. Rather than somebody saying the N-word, the bigger problem is systems in place that are hurting Black Americans. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's important to kind of use woke scold mentality and tactics to continue pushing out people who say things that are unacceptable in today's society?
Um, hmm. So I definitely think that a good part of like Black nationalist praxis is calling out people. But it's not just, obviously I do think that the, so-called annoying left is a thing. People who
Mhm.
just call out everybody, blame everybody, cancel a 13-year-old for saying the N-word
Yeah.
in middle school. That's disgusting. I think it's horrible optics. It just kind of degrades the left as a whole. But I do believe that a good part of Black nationalist praxis is calling out invert and subvert racism in all of its forms, not just on a systematic wide level, but on an interpersonal level. Because I do generally believe that racist thoughts turn into racist words, and racist words turn into racist beliefs being propagated in society, which leads to racist policies and racist governments. So you do definitely need to work on an individual level and a systematic level at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's one of the things that I talk about on here a lot, is that like racism by itself doesn't really matter. Like it's just a mean thing kind of to do. It's just like being mean to like dumb blondes or something like that. But the problem with racism is that it grows to a systemic level to where racist jokes, racist names, those things uh, start to get into your subconscious and make you think less of people, to where um, racism becomes a bigger and bigger problem in the United States, where like slavery or something like that ends up happening. So I completely agree. I guess last question. Um, why, what, I guess what makes you truly think that, I guess, white people and Black people could never get to a point to where we could progress and truly live in harmony together?
Um, well, I think to do that, you need to rewrite a lot of history. I think to do that, you need to fundamentally change reality. Um, as a Black nationalist, as a pro-Black person, pro-Black in a sense does mean to be anti-white. I'm not anti-white person. But if you look at like the origins, the epistemological origins of what white means, it's a metaphor for power. And I don't think that in present, like the in-group preference of whiteness, the solidarity that is whiteness, can ever be broken up truly. You need to fundamentally rewrite a lot of systems and a lot of things for me to believe that we can just all in kumbaya.
I don't know. I mean, I hear the same stuff from the alt-right all the time, where they say things like, integration and diversity has failed. Like we've already failed at that, and now we need to move on to something better, like segregation. And I just don't. I feel like that's such a defeatist attitude. I don't think that I agree with that. I think that I we're not that far removed from slavery, and I think that people are truly like things that are so ingrained with their family. Like these things take generations and generations and
Yeah.
generations to get over. It's not just
Yeah.
family, but it's culture. It's your state, your nation, and I think that we can continue to move past these things eventually. I think that somebody like somebody who pushes these ideas are these people give us hope, and it does seem that they are more and more common. Like the Progressive Party seems to get bigger and bigger, and we just voted in the most progressive president there's ever been, and I think that over time we truly can get there, and I think it sucks that Black people have to suffer in the meantime, but I think
Yeah.
for future generations and our kids and their kids, like, we have to continue trying so that we have a better world for the rest of them.
You said a bunch of stuff I was thinking there, Tom, but one of the things I wanted to say was I think he's right where what we're doing isn't quite getting us to where we want to be, if that's ever going to happen. I can understand the sentiment of, well, screw it, burn this to the ground, let's start fresh, and we can revisit it, later on in history. I can understand that to a degree, because right now, with the way the culture is and the country is set up, like state by state, it's like every state is like its own country, and it's weird because the culture is so different, state by state by state by state, and we don't all understand each other, and we don't all understand what it's like to live in this area versus this area. And it's not like the thinking has been pushed on us to accept everybody, because it's so much easier to keep us all divided and fighting amongst ourselves. And we saw that so much this year, especially with the election. If we are divided, we're easier to manipulate. And that's never been truer than it is, this year, especially considering the world we're living in right now. So I can understand it. I'd like to see a happier outcome than that. But you're right, Tom, it does take a lot longer. Like if you look at humanity as a whole and you look at this country, it's a blip on the radar, right? Like we're still in our infancy, even as a country. So it does, unfortunately, for all of us, take a long damn time to overcome adversity, overcome racism, and establish something that is beneficial for everybody, that's all inclusive. And it's probably never going to happen in our lifetime. That's the unfortunate truth. And I wish it weren't that way. But eventually, hopefully, we can come to some kind of agreement and understanding, and we can all, be a part of the same place.
I don't know. I can definitely, I'm not a diversity is fail type of guy. I do think there are some merits to diversity. I do think there are some, and again, though I am a segregationist, I don't think that black people and white people should just never talk to each other, or even like insane idea that we should have separate bathrooms and we should definitely still intermingle in a lot of places. I just truly believe that black self-determination is what will ultimately solve a lot of issues for the black community. And the community has wrestled with this idea time and time again, from Marcus Garvey versus W.D. Du Bois to Malcolm X versus, MLK. This idea of separation versus inclusivity has been debated time and time again. We've chosen inclusivity. We've, chosen to integrate into this American society because we've just been a fundamental part of it for so long. I just that maybe it's time for a different approach. That maybe this time, when it comes down to inclusivity, this is one of the biggest civil rights ever. When it comes down to inclusivity or segregation, maybe we should choose segregation and see how that works out.
But isn't that part of what's created the problems in the first place? I mean, segregation is how the white countries and Western countries have continued to build more technology and things like that and progress past everybody else. And if everybody else was included, then we may not have these problems in the first place.
Well, I disagree with the premise of that. Well, first, on a leftist purview, I think that competition creates, innovation. It's kind of a falsehood. I think that we see many situations where that's not necessarily true. But secondly, I disagree with the premise that Europe is just racing ahead of Africa or any, if you go back to history, Europe always knew and understood where Africa was, and they also knew and understood the amount of resources that were in Africa. And there were many attempts to invade Africa with very little success. And so I do think that we can, to answer your question, I do think that, has obviously divided us. I think that we've come to a point in history where we can actually embody the phrase that equal but separate, where we can actually embody that phrase of we have our own house, we have our own lands and our own resources to reap from. and we're free of the oppression of systematic racism. We can still acknowledge and have brotherness, have a sense of humanity. Us, I just all I want is to guarantee Africa's seat on the global table. That's all I want. For us to ascend to the stars together as equals, not as, us you guys dragging us behind, Africa still being a continent full of nations that can't control their own people, that have constant, revolutions, can't feed them and do for its own people. And Black America, being this community that has been here since the beginning, fought in every war, built Wall Street, built the banks. We did everything. Well, we didn't do everything, but we built this country for our own blood, sweat, and tears. And I want us to be on equal footing with the rest of the world and stand together as equals.
Yeah, but like when it comes to systemic racism, one of the problems that continues to push this is things like segregation, like natural segregation or even white flight, where Black communities kind of get stuck all by themselves without any other help around. Everybody else just kind of left them to fend for themselves. And I do think that just by chance that white countries have continued to progress past everybody else, and then Asian countries and so on, and that if we weren't self-segregating so much, that this wouldn't be such a problem. Like I think that one of the was something when I try to like convince other conservatives of systemic racism, one of the things that I talk to them about is single parent households, and that this is like a problem more common in the Black communities, and that there's even studies showing that even kids who grow up in communities with lots of other father figures around and coaches and, football coaches or basketball coaches or bigger brothers or something like that, they don't still have the same problems that other communities do, where they have a lack of father figures in the community. And if we didn't self-segregate the way that we currently do, there would just be a bunch of random father figures walking around in all communities, and it would be beneficial to everybody.
But I don't think that solves the underlying issue, though.
I don't think it does either, but I think that's part of the problem. I think it's one of the fundamental problems.
That like, white father figures can't father themselves onto Black. I know that might be a little bit of a straw man, but I'm just trying to understand your argument about this.
But fairly close. Yes, if you want to put it in a in a in a more derogatory way, sure, but yes, in general, white neighborhoods tend to have more father figures. Black neighborhoods tend to have less father figures, and when you have less father figures, they're more likely to have, crime and things like that, to where they're in jail and therefore not around to be father figures anymore. And so if they were integrated with other communities that had more father figures, that this would be something that could be beneficial. I know that's a lot of like a white savior complex.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, don't you think that's a little white savior complex, dude?
Yeah.
No, but again, I think that's a. I think, again, I'm not trying to insult anybody or make a. I think that's a very liberal take. I think it's a very roundabout, not really solving any of the systematic issues that are affecting this community, but rather just replace. Like, it's basically, putting on a different arm to a wound. Like, it may be a functional arm, but it's not my arm. Like, that's not the thing that I want. And I think fundamentally, I'm not sure if white father figures to Black children, again, I don't want to strawman your argument, but this idea, I'm not sure if that's going to apply in a technical sense that you think it might. I think ultimately, unless you can, again, erase history, or at least change reality and make Black culture and white culture, which are the antithesis of each other, to bind, I don't think that white father figures are going to do so well like coaching these black children. I think that you have to have a type of hmm. I think you have to know and understand the struggles of that community to follow that community. I think is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Yeah, I know you keep putting this in terms of race, and I know that that's how I'm making it sound. I just mean more like based on studies, based on statistics, we can look at things and see that father figures are helpful to communities. And regardless of the race, I know that this is in the end, I am making a white savior complex sort of argument, but all I care about is that in the end there are father figures regardless of the race, regardless of who what color the person is around, that one way or the other this is something that helps another community.
Well, if we
What we need to
decriminalize
do
marijuana, we'd have a lot more fathers around.
Yeah, true.
exactly.
Period.
Exactly. Again, I have to look. Like I have to look into the methodology of that specific study because I understand like a little bit about what that you're quoting. Like we don't know if the father figures that they're comparing or the father figures that they're looking at in these communities are separate from that community. What you're describing is one person, one community coming into another community and become fixes issues and problems. In that study, we don't know if these father figures that they were analyzing and studying were from a completely different community. I just one contention that I have that. Do you mind
Yeah,
if
sure.
I answer a question from the chat?
Yeah, which one is it?
Of the white and black culture are antithesis of each other. Question.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
the reason that I say white and black culture are antithesis of each other is because in the very words white and black are antithesis of each other. In a very literal sense, like white and black are opposites. But in that whiteness as not only as a culture but as an idea was formed to indirect opposition to blackness, indirect opposition to anything that is not white. This comes from the book The Invention of Whiteness idea. And essentially, like for example, right? First two census studies for Virginia, there was no mention of the word white. Everybody who was completing the census only identified with the different sections or regions of Europe. French, British, German, so on and so forth. Only after the Revolutionary War did we start to see laws coded with whiteness and blackness. Like for example, like a black slave owner couldn't own a white slave because whiteness was basically a way to create labor solidarity. It was essentially a way for white people to take care of other white people, and everything outside of that at the current time became the black. It's like literally a division between what is us and what is you. So like in some ways you could say that, like Native Americans are black. In some ways you can say that Latinos to an extent are black, especially like Afro Latinos. And so yeah, and then obviously the cultures came from that division of white is black, and so white culture and black culture oppose each other. They have to as credits of their creation.
Yeah, but the like being white or black for the most part is really just a social construct. I mean,
For sure.
like I for anybody in the audience who doesn't understand what I'm saying, like Obama is probably, I think he's something like 25% black and then like 75% white, and to us, because he looks black, that just makes him black automatically.
Yeah.
Whereas in reality, for the most part, the majority of his, like if we're talking about genetics or something deeper than just skin color, then it's he's really just a white dude. But we just look at him and say, okay, you fall into this category based on how I visually look at you. and now we call him the first black president and things like that. And in reality, he's not like a full, fledged African descendant the way that we would think of it. So
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm not a race realist by any respects.
So, well, that was going to be my next question. That the last black nationalist that I talked to wanted to try to tell me that white people are all actually, or that black people are more evolved than white people, and that white people are actually dumb and less than, and
Jesus.
like they're much like that. That black people will eventually just kill us all off because they're the greater human species.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's disgusting. They're staying upon the name black nationalist for sure. No real black nationalist figure actually believe that. These are just admittedly, I think good intentioned people. Not good faith at all, but good intentioned people for the most part. But they just have been tricked into believing that for me to make a distinction between blackness and whiteness, that I must go into genetics and that black people are superior. I'm not in any way a black supremacist. That's just idiotic.
I was about to say, wasn't there? What's his name? Crap. The name is eluding me, but there was a black Muslim from back in the day who hated the Jews and said all sorts of stuff like this. Something like a Khan or
Louis Farrakhan.
Louis Farrakhan. Yes, yeah. He a black nationalist?
Yes, he was a black nationalist. Yeah, but yeah. I mean, he was, okay. So black nationalism actually existed before like white nationalism. Actually, like a lot of the reasons that you hear our arguments and their rhetoric is because they took those arguments from them. Again, this is the thing that fascists do. They they take from leftist subcultures and incorporate them into themselves. And so he's a black nationalist post white nationalism. And so he identifies himself with the identitarianism, and he believes that, the black race is superior to the white race. And it's funny because again, he's modeling white nationalism, which arguments and things from black nationalism. Just not, the whole black people are superior thing. They didn't take that from us. We were like that.
So are you not an identitarian then?
It isn't identitarian. Do I think that, obviously I think that people and white people are different, and they have different interests. But I mean, again, obviously I don't think there's anything inherently or genetically different between the two of us. We're just, different types of human from two different, parts of the world.
You don't think that's just culturally pushed?
Sorry, I was reading something like that. What do you mean culturally pushed?
I mean, like white people who grow up, or sorry, black people who grow up in white suburbia and go to, white schools and white colleges and talk like a white person. Like, doesn't that tell you that black people and white people being completely different is just culturally pushed?
If you say that to say that whiteness and are like the white culture and black culture constructs, yes, of course, and obviously they can be adapted. Now, as far as we're talking about this phenomenon of like white people and black people, or like black people becoming kind of like pseudo white people, I guess you could call them. I think that's an aspect of white supremacy. That's an aspect of institutional racism. Most of the time, it's just people who are ashamed of their blackness, and so they reach out and try to either they, in my opinion, and I'm personally kind of against race mixing. I think that they might date white women to gain a type of proxy whiteness, and they might also act white to kind of justify white supremacy, because then they can look to, like, these type of black people, the quote unquote coons that we call them in black nationalism. They can point to these people and justify their white supremacy, and justify that black people should just get along with the program, so called.
So you would call Candace Owens a white supremacist?
Yes, for sure. 100%. 100%. She's a
So
coon.
yeah, that's something that I have trouble explaining to my audience sometimes, because again, I said this earlier, I feel like I see a lot more identity politics from the right these days than I do from the left. And when I say something about like a black person being a white supremacist, they're all like, oh, did you not notice that she's black, sir? Like, or if I say like Ben Shapiro parrots night what do you call it, like neo-Nazi talking points. They're like, do you not see the hat on the top of his head,
Yeah,
sir? Like,
for sure.
so how do you explain to people that Candace Owens is a white nationalist or a white supremacist?
I'm sorry, repeat the question. I'm sorry.
How would you explain to people that somebody like Candace Owens or a black person, how explain how they can be a white supremacist?
Because they hold up the mechanisms in which white supremacy operates. Simple as that. They may not be a part of that system intrinsically, but the mechanisms in which it affects our society and pulls its tendrils through every, segment and institution in our civilization, they reinforce those. They add validity to them, and they make them more real than they actually are. Um, and by that notion, she's a white supremacist because she supports the white supremacist machine. She is a cog in that machine.
Okay. Jesse West said, real question, where are these racial problems? Is it backward? I'm not sure. Is he saying backwards or
Is it
backwards?
The
backwoods?
backwoods
Like,
of
as in,
Midwest.
yeah.
Yeah, middle of nowhere.
Inner cities. Maybe we need to look into local government. Waits to be called racist.
Yeah, no. I mean, you're not a racist. That's just a joke. You're not a racist at all. Now, as far as where these problems, yeah, local government is to blame somewhat. And it's spread out across the United States. It goes from rural towns where they're extremely racially divided, and there's a black, it's split up by this. It's a black side of town and a white side of town. You don't cross them. There are these things called sundown towns. In the South, there's actually a website that you can go to and look sundown towns, and it's basically a collection or a database of places where racially motivated or believed racially motivated crimes have happened. And so black people in the South do not go there. There's a term and it's pervasive throughout their entire culture. You cannot go there because you likely will get killed by a KKK member, or they might mysteriously find you hanging from a rope in the middle of the woods, even though you've never had any racist ideation, and then the police force just claims that this is suicide without any investigation. But within the inner city, or within like these liberal paradises, it's a little less in your face. It's a little less there, but it still affects those communities, whether we look at something like housing or we look at something like the healthcare system. There's just there's multiple problems within inner city that work to disadvantage black people and, again, uphold white supremacy.
Let's see. Urasama said, not black people becoming pseudo-white people, the cultural difference between the two being a social construct you're placing colors on. Jesse West said, what is the color's opinion on the 1619 Project by the New York Times?
So I'll answer, obviously, the first question first. So, yes, these things are two social constructs, but obviously that doesn't make, I think people confuse like a social construct with it not being real, or it just doesn't happen, or it's just not a thing. It's a social construct, and it's persuasive because we created as a society, And so, yes, it's a social construct, but the reason that it has colors and the reason that people see a black culture and a white culture is because that's what society believes to happen. Like this is like the basics of sociology. This is the basics of critical race theory. Um, I don't know where you've been at. I don't know what the 1619 project is. If anybody could explain it to me, I'd love to hear.
It was pretty much a bunch of essays put together by reporters with I think it was the New York Times, where the overall premise was the United States is built on slavery. That pretty much everything that we
Yes.
have now only here because of slavery. And you can go ahead and give your answer, but I kind of have a problem with that premise. So go ahead.
I mean, if what you're saying is true about this project, then yeah, I totally agree with that premise. I do again, black, slavery built Wall Street. Slavery has built up so many different institutions and banks, and in a very literal sense, but in a figurative sense as well. Slavery has built up the prison systems. Slavery has built up big pharma. Like racism is, and again, this is why I'm I'm a segregationist. This is why um, this is why I'm a reservationist. Racism and white supremacy is built into the fabric and foundation of America, and you cannot untie these two because they're persuasive through every system that exists.
So my issue with the 1619 project is that there's been numerous studies done on this, and they pretty much show that if slave owners and like plantation owners back in the day had actually not had slaves but paid people, all of the companies or all of the fields that actually paid their workers were much more productive, got things done way faster because they didn't have to worry about having somebody run off. They didn't have to have people standing there whipping people. They didn't have to have, people, guards at all times and people with dogs hunting people down. Like the studies have been done over and over and over and continue to show that anybody who didn't have slaves and actually had employees were much more productive, and that even just like the small amount of production that we got from slavery, because from what I believe, there were a small amount of slave owners or people who were wealthy enough to be slave owners, that they all kind of um, lost out if they had just paid their workers, if they had paid the slaves and made them employees instead, that they probably would have been better off.
Well, yeah, of course. And that makes sense. Slavery and feudalism are the predecessors to capitalism, and one could not have existed without the other. Or well, I would say that feudalism and slavery had to happen before capitalism could have been put in place. And so, it makes sense to me that a more capitalist form, um, the capitalist form was much more efficient at producing wealth and building up the country. Now if we're just going to say that slavery just by itself is behind everything, I'm not sure if I agree with that. My more point was that racism has been behind everything, that white
Gotcha.
supremacy has been behind everything.
Yeah.
Now obviously always have this debate with the USSR. I mean, not the USSR, but I'm sorry. What was the South in the Civil War? What were they called again?
The Confederates.
The Confederacy. A lot of people like to not like in the South and in the Confederacy, not a lot of people actually own slaves. And I say that's true. Obviously, that stat is pretty relevant. But if your white grandma who didn't own any slaves, you know, told on my black grandfather, it said that she raped her, that he raped him. I mean, you get what I'm trying to say, that he raped her. She still contributed to the system of white supremacy, even
Mhm.
though she didn't own any slaves. the South as a whole, and generally the whole United States, still built up white supremacy, and that white supremacy, this labor solidarity, actually was really beneficial to building up the United States. I mean, I think generally that may be one of the key components that made the United States so goddamn successful. Because while there are multiple, in Europe, they were, your main enemy is right above you. Like if you're France, the British are right there, and they're an equal power to you. But United States, Mexico's not really an issue. Canada's not really an issue. Minorities within our country aren't really an issue, which is not seen in most countries. So it kind of allowed white supremacy in America just to flourish and just to build upon, self-propagate continuously. And so I would agree with the sentiment that white supremacy is behind everything. I'm not sure if slavery is. I think that's too narrow of a view for that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely say that the United States was built on white supremacy, but I wouldn't say that it was built on slavery. So I definitely agree. What kind of socialist are you?
I'm a market socialist. Then from there we can do pretty
I'm
much
assuming
whatever we want.
I know where you found my channel then.
Yeah. I literally found it in the Voss server. Yeah, fair.
Yes, you said yes.
Yeah, I'm a market
I
socialist.
actually do have a question. I was wondering, what are your thoughts as far as like rewriting or erasing some of the histories of America? Like, obviously, you're a big proponent of like this is what built this country. We need some recognition for it. But like, if you look at like say like Disney movies trying to rewrite history and be more inclusive, or completely erase like the old era cartoons of the was it the Crows and the Dumbo movie, stuff like that, like pretending
Yeah.
stuff like that happening, tearing down statues. What are your thoughts on like erasing history and like pretending it never happened? Do you think that should happen, or should we as a country own up to it and learn from the mistakes?
Well, as far as the Confederate statues, I support that. I support bringing down Confederate statues, not because I want to erase the history. I think that these Confederate names need to be burned into the book of history. But just because they're historically irrelevant. Like the Confederacy only lasted for what, 5 years? My sister is older than that. So like I don't think that they're relevant. I don't need to be like euthanized. They don't need to be deified. These people need to be seen as bad people who existed, but they definitely need to be remembered. As far as like kind of rewriting history and like our media, I disagree with that. I don't think that we need a Black Ariel. I don't think that we need like well, the gender issue is a different issue, but I don't think that we need to just throw Black people into historical positions and places. It's historically true that Black people and diverse people existed in many places. As far as like the like goal that you're trying to do with like putting them into the media, I think that it's not effective. You're just gonna make people mad. You're just gonna get people on Twitter yelling, and Black people aren't really gonna enjoy it. They're just gonna watch it and be like, okay, whoop-de-doo. There's a Black Avenger. None of the issues in my life have been solved. So, yeah, I don't. I personally, I'm a big proponent of just we need to make our own stories. I know that's a chud point, but I truly do believe that Africa fantasy, Afro sci-fi, and like Afro horror, which has been a big thing that's been happening with like stories like Get Out and Us, that have been growing bigger. And so I really just want Black independent artists to create Black art that reflects the Black experience, and fill them with Black people. That's what I want.
I mean, I think that I one, I would highly disagree that taking down Confederate statues erases history. We have museums and books for history. We don't put up statues for history. We put up statues to commemorate somebody. And if we want to commemorate somebody, the last people we should want to commemorate are Confederates. So
Exactly.
I don't think that that's any sort of. I don't think taking down statues is tearing down history. But when it comes to Black Avengers or something like that, I do think that stuff's important. I think it's important to have uh, heroes that look like you. I think it's important to have people to look up to that you can um, you can feel connected to, or that you can feel some sort of culture with, or something like that. And so when they have like a Black Panther or a Black Ariel, even I don't know if I care about that any, but some people apparently care if there's a Black Ariel. Like, I think that things like that are helpful because we can kind of push the idea that it doesn't matter what color they are. It's all kind of irrelevant in the end. And I think it's a bit of like a, I don't know, like a liberal idea to have these like hardcore identities that matter to everybody, to where we wouldn't want a Black Ariel.
Oh no, I'm not against Black Ariel. I'm not against Black Avengers. Of course, people, if that's what they want, that's what they want. I just don't think that it needs to end there. That I think that we can't just say Black Avenger, racism solved, BLM, let's go.
Yeah.
It needs to continue on. It needs to. Again, I'm all for group economics and Black people owning the means of production. And so I want more Black studios. I want more, Black agencies. I want for us to not only control the means in which these things are produced, but produce media that accurately reflects what the Black experience is. And so we can have exactly what you're talking about, where we can look up to these people and identify with them. Just for, African Americans. And it's not to say, our media is just the best, but to say that's what we've had forever. We've had white cinema that reflects that white people own. They own the means in which that cinema was created, and it perfectly reflected the white experience, and it had all white cast. Why can we not do the same with Black people?
Okay. Yeah, I personally identify as conservative for the most part. Like, I am uh, pro-life. I do want a smaller government, um, but I do think that like socialism, and I've talked about this on the show numerous times. I do think that socialism is something that will eventually be necessary. Once we get into late stage capitalism, I don't think we're there yet. I think we can see signs of it, and I think it's like becoming more and more obvious and eminent that that's something that's going to be necessary at some point. But as of right now, I don't think we need socialism. I think we need socialized capitalism in order to kind of make up for the weak spots that we currently have. And I think that it's possible to eventually make up for all of the weak spots to where you don't need socialism at all. I just don't know that that's ever actually going to happen.
Um, well, okay, so definitely SOCDEM policies are the road to market socialism and so on and so forth. Um, but I, as far as whether we need socialism right now, I think that COVID-19 and the pandemic has showed us the fragility of capitalism, has showed us just how just how fragile it is and how capable we are of just disrupting the entire system.
Mm-hmm.
And I would disagree with you on the notion that we're not in late stage capitalism. Um, even Marx predicted that late stage capitalism would go on forever, that it would be around a lot. And again, with this pandemic, I think that we've only further shown just how um, fragile and weak capitalism is. With 1/3 of the U.S. economy just disappearing in the middle of the night and it's never to be seen again. With 80% of businesses that closed down for the pandemic to never open back up again, and for the stock market to be making billions This has been one of the greatest wealth transferences to ever occur in history. So yeah, no, I don't think that people are going to put up with this much longer. We're starting to see breadlines. We're starting to see people living in their cars en masse. Um, this is it's about to get bad in a bad way. So I just want people to be prepared for it. I want the black people to be prepared for it when it eventually does hit.
Okay. You got anything else you want to throw out there? You got a channel or anything?
Oh yeah. So well, I have an Instagram. And Instagram can lead you to TikTok. So my Instagram is newgen_Pan African. Just because I'm young. And yeah,
How do we
just
spell it?
Newgen NEWGEN_Pan African. It's a starting up channel for now, or space, but I'm working on it. I'm working to grow my brand.
New_pan what?
Newgen Pan
New.
African. Newgen_Pan African.
There you are. Okay, cool. Yeah, anything else you want to throw out there before we jump on?
No, yeah, I actually think I got to say everything I want to say, unless you guys have any questions for me. Um, you know, other than that, yeah, I think I spoke my piece.
Cool. You got anything else, Tony?
No, well spoken. Talked your points up. Loved it. Good discussion. Definitely showcased some different things that I wasn't fully aware that people were pushing for. But you definitely said it in a way that I can definitely appreciate your angle and your sentiment. So appreciate the discussion. Loved it.
I actually do have one more thing. So the way that liberalism looks at segregation, you have pretty much an impossible task to convince people, especially white people, that segregation is a good thing, right?
Like you saying, it's a hard task to do for white liberals.
I'm saying that is pretty much impossible because as soon as white people start saying, yeah, segregation's a good thing, they're immediately going to be labeled a racist. And they're going to be parroting talking points from the alt-right and other white nationalists. And so at least that's what it sounds like. And so
Yeah.
it's like an impossible task to get them on board, right?
Well, that's that's one of the beauties of this ideology. I don't need to really convince white people. As shallow as that sounds,
Yeah.
the most important demographic for me is black people, and honestly, I only really need black people to jump on board. Obviously, it'd be great to have some white support and allies. It'd be amazing, and I would not turn them away like Malcolm X did. But I want to be built on a base that ultimately, at the very core of my ideology, is self-determination. Is we must control the means of production, and we must control our own direction and our own path. Not anybody else. Not white supremacy. Not white saviors. We need to control our own destiny. And so, I agree with you. White liberals are gonna sound crazy as hell talking about segregationism. But I don't think I don't mind. I guess that's not my problem. I guess.
Like, will the
You
will
know.
the leftist of the left even like comprehend such a notion? Like, no, you can't do this to us. Like, we've been trying so hard to include you. Like, that's our virtue signal. Please don't take that away from us. We'll have nothing left.
Yeah, that's pretty based. No, I mean, yeah, I've definitely had that experience with them before when I talk to them. Usually for them, what I usually just bring up is like how left out we've been in leftist movements. Um and how exclusionary they've been, and how like going forward, like a socialist or a communist revolution, it's probably not going to include us. You're probably going to leave us out to dry. So a lot of, because that's mostly their main contention is like, well, why can't you just be a part of the socialist movement? Why can't you just be with, like, no, I don't want to be with you, because at the core of it, you're probably going to like abandon me. You're probably gonna turn around and leave the second that you face any type of retribution. Because I don't like, if push comes to shove, and white, like the Proud Boys, start gunning down black people in the streets, you think white liberals are going to be standing there like blocking the bullets? No. A lot of their protesting and activism is performative, like to feel good about themselves. When it comes down to the line, are they really going to push for black issues? Not really. They might, they're gonna wave their signs in the air. Are they going to donate thousands of dollars to lobby politicians? Not really. Are they gonna when this like stake really come down to it, are they going to be standing hand in hand with us, like the Spartans? Probably not. And so yeah, no, I mean, I try to convince them, but again, you and your leftist white savior complex have nothing to do with me, so I don't really care.
Okay. Jesse West said that's the only thing America was built on, slavery and white people being bad. We need to be careful with these statements. I'm not denying history, rather feel you are. I agree slavery and many other things were problems and were part of this, but framing it that way seems counterintuitive and F statues.
Well, I think that disingenuous argument. You understand that that's not what I'm saying. You know that that's not what I'm saying. You know that I'm not saying that that exclusively white supremacy and slavery are not the only things that built up this country. Obviously, what goes to building up a civilization is multifaceted. Depends on, but when we're having these type of discussions, it's useful to point out, isolate, and discuss, pull apart the different things that have helped and built up the civilization that is America, and work to discuss through them, work to discuss it's justified. Is this something that we need to continue on for our society? It's something that we can pull out, something that we can maybe potentially put back in. I think there's lots of things that America's built on. It's been built on the patriarchy. It's been built on capitalism. It's been built on imperialism. Like there's so many different, there's a multitude of things, but obviously we can't have this ultra meta conversation about all things at once in the fourth dimension. We need to focus and work through these things point by point.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point where black people were considered subhuman by science. Science said black people were subhuman. And in the meantime, white people were able to continue to grow and build and do all of these other things while cutting everybody out. Something like NAFTA couldn't have existed because everybody else that wasn't white was subhuman. And we were able to prioritize anybody who was white or white enough to join in on the success. And then we move on to things like redlining and slavery and all sorts of other things that continue to kind of shield us from everybody else, while we just happened to be the ones who were growing at a faster rate than everyone else. And we made sure that nobody else could join in the success at the same time. So like that is definitely white supremacy, and that's definitely during our biggest booms of economic growth, we continued to make sure that we were the only ones who benefited from it. So that's why I would say we are built on white supremacy. Obviously, like he said, it's not the only thing, it's multifaceted. There's a lot that goes into it. But white people currently, systemic racism currently exists the way it does because of white supremacy and the way that our countries have grown over time by segregating everybody else and keeping them out of the picture.
For sure. I agree in totality with that statement. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you messaging me and jumping on, and you can message me in the future. I'll think a lot about what you said.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. Thank you for having me on. It was an honor. Yeah, I appreciate it. It was a very nice and conducive conversation.
Awesome, dude. Have a good day.
You too.
So, what do you think, Tony? You a black nationalist now?
You know, no, I'm not. I don't think I'm gonna quite jump on the bandwagon just yet, but I I do find the whole concept of what we're doing isn't working. So fuck this shit. You know, this would work. Like, yeah, sure, segregation's been bad and all that, but we would flourish if we were, kind of doing our own thing over here, and then you guys just kind of, do your thing, and we'll just kind of, we'll get along, but we'll do our own thing, and we'll flourish on our own. I, I can understand the sentiment because you look at the country as a whole right now, and it's hard to deny that we're kind of at a stalemate. If you want to look at it as someone who lives in this country right now, and sure, what we're doing right now isn't exactly working. We're not really vying for all inclusion. We're pushing for the idea of individualism and fighting amongst each other because again, divide just makes it easier to control us and get what you want out of us as a whole from the people at the top. And it just sucks that we're so capable and willing to just fall into that trap of being divided and fighting amongst each other. And it's just kind of been ingrained into us as a society for a long, long time. And it's hard to break that curse, especially since we're kind of down here and the upper echelon, and the government is up here. How do we break that cycle? It's not easy, and I don't have the answer for it, but I don't feel like segregation is the answer. But as divided as the country as we are, and as diverse as we are state by state, it is kind of hard to imagine that we're ever going to get to a place where we're all going to be in perfect harmony. Like, that's going to take generation after generation after generation. Like you said, it's not going to happen overnight. Eventually, they'll read about this as a time when like this actually existed. Like, racism, segregation, that was a thing. Like, if you take color out of the equation, you make everybody completely and utterly colorblind, period. It's not going to be a race thing. It's going to be a culture thing because we do have so many different cultures, and that's not going to go away. We are a very free country in the grand scheme of the world, and our vast difference in culture is probably what's holding us back from achieving such a thing. So, unless that goes away, I think that's probably going to be the biggest hurdle, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of arguments that he made that kind of resonated with me.
For sure.
I don't know that splitting things up though is necessarily the answer. Like I said at one point, I think that for future generations, the important thing is that we fix things now.
Mm-hmm.
But I do understand the idea that everything is run by white people, and that they continuously feel like they're being left out and pushed down in a system that is run for and by white people, and that if they can just build their own system over here for themselves by themselves, then they
Yeah.
can start to be successful. And I understand that. I understand the need for that and the want for that, but I just think that, again, for future generations, we got to get through this now. I don't think that color blindness is in any way an answer. I mean, I think that lots of people right now try really hard to be colorblind, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
the want and need for that is like, it comes from a good place. But all in all, the people who are screaming all lives matter, those are the people who are trying to be colorblind. They're the ones who are trying to say, like,
Yeah.
hey, let's not make things about color here, guys. Let's simplify things and just say everybody. And it's like, well, no,
Yeah.
everybody doesn't have the same life experiences. Some people are struggling more, and it's
Yep.
because of their color. And so being colorblind makes it to where you can't even see the problems that
Yeah.
certain races are having. And I guess I want to think a lot about the stuff that he said. I truly think that the best way to progress past this is to continue down the path that we're on now. I think Black people currently are going to continue to struggle, and it sucks. It sucks that that has to be the case.
Yeah.
It sucks that that's the way things are. But I think movements like Black Lives Matter and other movements out there are going to continue to push things forward to where we can get to a place where Black nationalists aren't even necessary anymore.
Yeah, I think with the whole the meme that I saw that really I think resonated with me the most as far as the BLM movement goes was it was just a simple cartoon. There's a house on fire and they're going to put it out, and then a guy runs up and goes, "Hey, well, what about my house?" And they're like, "Well, your house isn't on fire right now." "Oh, so my house isn't important?" Well, no, it is, but like this is like right now we need to address this situation because it's on fire. Well, you clearly don't appreciate my house. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. Like right now, this is a big deal for a lot of people, and sure, we can sit here and say like everybody's important. Well, sure, but there are other issues that not everybody is experiencing, and I think that's the big thing. And different parts of the world, especially in like my part of the world, it's people ignore it because it's just so easy to ignore because we are so secluded from the rest of the country. It's easy to ignore, and it's easy to almost pretend like it's not a real problem. These issues over here aren't real issues because we don't have to see them firsthand. And for most people, unless they have to see them with their own eyes, then they can kind of pretend like it's not really a thing. And and I think we're all guilty of that to a certain degree, but yeah, once you see it firsthand and once you accept it, it's different. So I think everybody needs to just kind of understand the concept of some of these things and not just dismiss it because you don't have to look at it.
Mm. As Jesse said, we used to be the great melting pot. Powerful people are keeping it from melting. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I
yeah,
grew up differently from most people. I grew up in New York. I went to an all Black school where I was one of maybe 2 or 3 white kids there. My dad pastored an all Black church where our family was literally the only white people there. We were
wow,
one of few white people in our neighborhood. I couldn't go to the public school because it was dangerous. I would have been the only
yeah.
white kid there. Like I
My
grew
dad and
up
my uncle did that in the '70s in Florida.
Yeah, I grew up very differently from most people, yet still, like, I came up with the idea that Black people have lower IQs and they're just kind of genetically dispossessed or genetically. I can't say it. I don't know why the word won't come
Disposition,
out. Yeah, I guess dispositioned, predisposed to
predisposed.
crime and things like that. I guess it took a while to kind of get those ideas out of my head because it started to.
Sure.
Once I looked at more and more studies and more stats and started to understand these things more, um, it it all made a lot more sense a lot more quickly. So like and when we talk about what it's like to grow up as a minority in a certain area, like that's what I was, the minority. I was I didn't grow up like most
Yeah.
people. I grew up as a white kid who was the minority. I grew up as the white kid who looked around and said, "Oh, I'm the one who's different." So
I love what was it on Chappelle's show when they did the reverse of the Real World when it was all black people but one white guy in the world house, and they're just like partying nonstop and like threatening to stab him, but like he freaks out one time because he's got to work in the morning, and they're just like, we just don't feel comfortable with you in the house anymore, so you gotta go.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it's weird having, especially like it's funny because like you said, like my dad and my uncle did that in the '70s in Florida, and that's a completely different time, from when you experienced it, where you experienced it, but it's still the concept remains, and being the minority does kind of flip a switch for you, and it does at least allow you to see things in a different light, especially if you live in different cultures. And I know people who've moved to place and their views change depending on where they lived last, but you just got to remember, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. That's what I say a lot. It's my cliche go-to. We're all humans. We're all in this to a certain extent together. We're not in the same storm, but we are all into this together. So, be a human being first and foremost.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know. It was very like it was a hardcore culture shock for me and my family to move
Oh, I
from
bet.
New York to Georgia. Like I had my sisters all had black girlfriend or boyfriends. I had black girlfriends growing up. Um, we we all grew up in a very different world, and then moving to Georgia, we had to be taught what racism was
Mm,
and how to be racist and how to think like a racist and like all of these things. There, it's not inherent, it's not natural, it's not normal.
yeah,
These are things that you have to be taught
yeah,
in order to understand it. Like we all look at the meme of the black boy, the little black boy and the little white boy who excitedly like run up to each other and hug each other
yeah.
as little kids, and like that's how we all grow up when we're younger, but eventually we
Hmm.
start learning different things over time. And it's a problem for like one thing that humans naturally have is the ability to perceive patterns. We can see them very easily. And that once we notice a pattern, we start to believe that we understand something. And so if we
Hmm.
look at black people and they're consistently poor and they consistently are missing teeth and they're consistently doing drugs and they're consistently committing crimes and living in inner cities and living in, they're like, and they have bigger problems than we do, then we start to connect these dots and we believe we found
Yeah,
a pattern that shows that black people are somehow less than us. And um it's it is what like it is something that makes humans great, and it's something that makes that is a problem for humans at the same time. So you got
it's part
anything
of
else?
that puzzle mentality that it's ingrained in our brain. Like we, our brains need puzzles to function. We look for a point A to point B. We look for an exit point. We systematically need a puzzle to solve in any given situation, and unfortunately, race has always kind of been one of those puzzles that we try to solve, and it didn't need to be solved. So, yeah, no, like you said, I can definitely see where you're going with that, and it's one of those unfortunate things because it is absolutely taught. Um, I yeah, I see it with my son. He doesn't see color, and that's great. I want that to always be the case, but I'm sure it won't be because once they start interacting with their friends and depending on how they're brought up, things change. So we just try to steer them in the way that is going to be the least damaging to other people, and that's really all we can do. Just teach
Yep.
teach the next generation to be more willing to be accepting towards everybody.
Yeah, things are getting better. We know
Oh yeah,
things are getting better. We just
it might
the
not
hope
look
is,
like it, but it's getting there.
yeah, the hope is that it just continues to getting better, or it
Yeah.
continues getting better. Jesse West said the personal experience hopefully doesn't represent most people. I was raised around racist people and was taught they are stupid.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't have anything else. You got anything else, Tony?
No, this is very interesting. Like that, I wasn't expecting that type of conversation tonight, but this was great. I loved it.
Yeah, I'm doing my best to kind of I mean, it's pretty obvious that my entire audience is right wing and that I've got like everybody else and then like Melanie and Project Sad Face. Like that's it. Um, so I'm trying to push myself in farther leftist circles and um, see if we can get more variety in the conversation here. So
Yeah.
he happened to see a little ad that I put out and messaged me, said, "Hey, I got a he said, I'm a black nationalist. I'd like to come on and have a conversation." Dope. Let's do it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No,
So
very. He was well spoken, and he definitely knew his shit. Love that. I like hearing from people who actually understand what it is that they're telling you that they believe. That's great stuff.
are you trying to say he's one of the good ones, Tony?
Hey, I try to find the good in everybody, but no, well spoken, and anytime we ask him a question, he had an answer. That what more can you ask for?
Urasama said I was just too opposite of the guy. I'd have I'd have had to be typing paragraphs constantly if I stuck around. Thanks for the super.